Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are discussing leadership and what it means to be a course-based leader. Robert and I wanted to talk about this because this is obviously a time in which good leaders are needed as much as ever, and yet our collective attitudes towards leadership are changing dramatically. And so what we thought we would do today is look at how the course would have us respond. What are its views on leadership and what we can do to be the kind of leaders the course is asking for in our own lives and in the world. On a personal note, I just want to say that before I came to the circle, I was a career author. So I've been speaking on leadership in some form for almost 20 years. And one thing I know for sure is that regardless of whether you see yourself as a leader or not, you are. A simple definition of leadership is the ability to influence other people. And there isn't anyone who doesn't have someone, and oftentimes quite a few people, who are looking to you for signals on how to respond to the experiences in their own lives and to the increasingly insane times in which we live. And so let's get started. Let's talk about that, Robert. We recorded a podcast recently on the cult of self, which is the cultural shift that we're all experiencing away from the collective good to a focus on individual desires and needs. And a byproduct of what we're calling the cult of self isn't just a glorification of self, but it's also a mentality of don't tell me what to do. And so, for the purposes of this conversation, a mindset of don't tell me what to do is not exactly a mindset that is open to leadership, which is all about guiding people through what to do. So Robert, how do you think that the cult of self has had an influence on leadership in general?
Well, I think, what you said kind of nails it. I mean, if your attitude is this is all about me, nobody tells me what to do, then you're going to have a certain fundamental suspicion towards leadership. And I mean, I think one of the best examples of that is that saying that we all quote, which is, we are all teachers and students of each other. And that's presented as a course quote. It's not from the course, it's from Attitudinal Healing. The idea that the course is self-study says nobody's teaching me, there are no teachers. And I think the general attitude is nobody should be somehow an authority over me. And there's a lot of toxic elements associated with authority in our world. I mean, that's not to be denied, but there's so much that comes from being led by somebody who knows more, has more experience, has more ability, etc. That you can't like make up for that ground if you don't allow that to happen. And there's so much to be gained by passing on what you've gained to others, being a leader to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole mindset that stems from cult of self of don't tell me what to do has, in some sense, I mean, there are a lot of great leaders in the world. There really are. And yet, so many of our authority figures, our spiritual leaders, our political leaders, and the list goes on, teachers, list goes on, have let us down. And so when there is a dearth of real leadership in the world, it's almost understandable that the tendency would be to turn towards the self. And yet that's just creating more distrust of leadership. And this distrust of leadership has spilled over into the course community. So you want to say anything about how that has happened and what the effects are?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think in the course community, we have very much that attitude of it's all about me. There should be no authorities over me. And yet I think there's a huge amount of authority that we turn to in the course community. There's the authority of the course. There's the authority of teachers who are perceived as, somehow close to the source. because they knew Helen or because they are in touch with higher beings or whatever. So we have a very kind of schizoid relationship, I think, with authority in the course community, both embracing it in really, strong ways, as well as rejecting it. And I think both sides of those things could be a lot healthier.
Yeah, maybe our rejection of authority stems from our original rejection of authority when we separated from God, when we rejected God. But we've been talking a lot about the ways in which this attitude of "don't tell me what to do" stems into the course community, and you've mentioned some of the ways, but I'll just also add that we want to keep the miracle of A Course in Miracles confined to a shift in our own mind, which means it's just that our spiritual journey becomes more individual that way, more personal that way, less engaging with other people, less interaction with other people. We want to make the book self-study versus have a teacher, when the course has a manual for teachers, which is the opposite of self-study. Um, we've mentioned on this podcast many times that we want to make ourselves synonymous with God. Like, so there's this conversation about hierarchy and are we God? And there's so much of that dialogue going on in the spiritual community and in the course community as well, that we don't even want to submit to the authority of God. And so if we don't want to submit to the authority of God, how are we going to be comfortable with submitting to authority in other people? And
Yeah.
so, yeah. So
It's just pervasive.
Yeah, if we don't want to be led by God, then how are we going to be comfortable with being led by one another? But even though we have difficulty, and even though we're uncomfortable with the concept of leading and being led, the Course doesn't share that view. The Course places a real value on leadership, and specifically helping us replace the illusions of the ego with the truth of God. And a few years ago, you did a study on the Course's teachings that relate to leadership. And so I'd love for you to share some of your key findings from that study.
Yeah, well, there's so much that I could share from that. I mean, way too much for us to cover in this hour.
I see a workshop coming.
Well, maybe. I mean, anyway, so I think the main thing I took away is that leadership is not so much the formal kind of leadership we think of that's restricted to people being in formal roles of leadership in businesses, for instance, or in politics. It includes that. And it's not so much leading people in more conventional areas of life, though it includes that too. It's really summarized in this single image that includes all of us. And the image is, there is a road to God, and we ourselves walk along that road. And as we walk along that road, we are leading people who are walking behind us, and we are following the Holy Spirit who goes ahead of us. And that's the Course's, that's everything the Course says about leadership is contained in that very simple idea. And when you think about it, leading means you're ahead, right? You're going ahead, and as you go ahead, you guide the way to others who are following. And I mean, there's a very kind of physical image that one associates with leading. And I never really thought about that. I thought leadership was you had authority over people in a certain formal structure. But really, it's about you are, by walking the pathway to God yourself and following the Holy Spirit who goes before you, you are leading the way for others to come behind you, and you're leading the way on the most important way of all. right? Way more important than any kind of business context or political context or anything like that. You're leading the way on the way to God.
So many of the course's quotes related to leadership boil down to that idea where you're following God and you do have others who are following you, but your goal is to share with them what you know so that their path to God is straight and that they can in turn use what they've learned from you to help others along their way to God. And so it really is a lovely image. All throughout the course, I just did a sermon on leadership for our Course Companion Sunday gathering, and I was really struck by that idea and how central it is to how the Course views leadership, as you're saying, but how often it's repeated. Jesus really wants us to heal our perception, to get our own views, right? To look to God for answers and the way, and then demonstrate that to those who are coming up behind us.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The more we talk about this, I'm thinking about the many points I came out of that study with. They're all implicit in that single image of we're walking ahead, they're following behind, we're following God or the Holy Spirit. And one of the things implicit in that is if you are walking ahead of people, you can guide them, but you don't control them. They are free to either follow you or not. And that's just one of the many points, all of which are somehow implicit in that single simple image.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful image. It is an absolutely beautiful image, but at the same time, the course does recognize that there are some toxic elements to leadership as well. So, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I think it's only fair while we're saying we have these problems with leadership, what's wrong with us? It's a reflection of the big authority problem that got the whole separation started. While we're saying all that, we should acknowledge that the course is keenly aware of problems around leadership, problems around authority, and it indicates this in a number of places. One place is in the second section of the text's final chapter, chapter 31, that has a paragraph a discussion that spans a few paragraphs about leading and following. And the idea there is that we are constantly seeing ourselves divided between, ourselves and our brothers um, in terms of these two roles. And so there are times when we want to have the leader role, presumably for the power that it entails and the prestige. And at
And
those
the
times,
freedom.
and the freedom, and at those times, we have an implicit demand that our brother take the follower role. How can we be a leader if we don't have a follower? Um, and then there are other times we want to be the follower. We don't want the responsibility. We don't want the pressure. We don't want to have to come up with what to do, right? So we want to be the follower. And in those moments, we look to our brother and we say, you better be the leader here. And the idea is, he says in that section, and we hate the other person when they will not take up the role required by the role that we want. So that's one discussion that shows the toxic nature, because it's not just toxic on the leader's part, it's toxic on the follower's part too. Um, and then other discussions about this really focus on the inherent inequality in the roles of leader and follower. I mean, the leader is within that situation the one who has more power and hopefully more ability and more experience, etc. And the course's main concern is that while we engage in the hierarchy of leader and follower, or teacher and pupil, or healer and patient, and the course has the same concerns in relation to all of those. While we engage in that extremely useful situation, we do not accept the inequality inherent in it as real. So we look at each other, we look at the follower, or we look at the leader, and we say we are perfectly equal, but even within that perfect equality, we're going to act out this situation because of the mutual profit in it for us both. And so he sees the very, very real danger that the leader is going to say, I'm the special one, right? Or the psychotherapist is going to say, healing consists of collecting bodies to worship at my shrine. And then the patients or the followers are going to say, and yes, I agree. If I can just worship at the shrine of the right superstar, rock star therapist, then I'll be healed. And
Or rock
so,
star anything,
rock star anything.
anything. We just want to rub up against that so that specialness rubs up on us.
Right. So he's really concerned throughout, whenever there is a hierarchical role situation, he's really concerned that we'll take that as the reality of who we are rather than simply using it for mutual advance.
Yeah, and that's an area where I think we get very confused. And when you hear this idea that we're all teachers and students of each other, study groups will pride themselves on having no leader, and there's a way in which that feels appealing, right? You don't have anybody over you. But I hear you on that course quote about when there's a vacuum of leadership, oftentimes we're looking at each other like, where's the leader? So
Yeah.
it's like
I
you
don't want to
can't,
be it. You're it.
right. So you almost like can't win. But at the same time, the course really does a nice job of bridging that gap, because what the course says is, yes, at the level of what is real, we are all truly equal. And one thing that I really love about the course is it constantly, as you're saying, comes back to that theme when it's discussing issues of hierarchy. And so when in the manual for teachers and in the supplement on psychotherapy and in the essential goal of therapy section in the course, he mentions this idea that at the end of the day, it is equal. You are equal. The therapist is equal to the patient. The teacher is equal to the pupil, and vice versa. But at the same time, there is someone does know more. And that person who's walking a step ahead, their job is to impart what they know to their follower, to teach them what they know and help that person get out of the illusion so that they can also find their way home to God. And so that idea that there is a hierarchical nature to relationship, that someone is the leader and someone is the follower for a time, the course is very comfortable with that. And
At least in some relationships.
we should be comfortable with that idea, you know, because again, we want to say that that we're all teachers and students of each other, and yet the course really isn't saying that. Now, I just want to be clear too that the course does say that the only difference between us on this level of form is skills and abilities. And so, if you have more skill in a certain area, why wouldn't we trust someone who has more skills in
Sure.
a certain
Sure.
area
Yeah.
rather, you know, why aren't we more willing to be led, in other words, by people who know what they're doing?
And we are in practically every other area of life. I mean, we are. You don't get good at things without learning from other people. Interesting, you mentioned about the difference between, say, teacher and pupil. There's a great line in the manual that says only time divides teacher and pupil. So we read that and we say, they're not divided, but that's not what's said. He says time does divide teacher and pupil, which means that where the teacher is today, the pupil is not yet there today. And
Hmm.
but he will be there. And there is an equality even in that. And so that too, I just want to point out is in that image, right? When you're walking ahead and the other is walking behind, the place you're at right now they're going to be, right? So only time divides the leader and the follower, but on the level of time, they're not at the same place at the same time.
Yeah, and if we took more of a course-based approach to the idea of leading and following, I think again we would be more comfortable with it, because all that it's saying at the end of the day is that we're walking home to God. There are some who are a step ahead, whose job it is to pass on what they know to followers, whose job it is at that point to pass on what they've learned to those who come behind. And so it goes. And
Yeah.
and we know this model. I mentioned in the sermon, this is like page 1 of every leadership book ever. But there's a breakdown in trust, and there's a breakdown in trust in each other and trust in leadership. And part of it is because of that inequality piece. Like there are leaders who just absolutely want the role for the specialness that comes with it. And then there's the other side, as you were saying, those who just don't want to step forward, hoping that someone else will. And so between these two things, I think we're there's just breakdowns everywhere.
Yeah, and that dichotomy comes out really well in the early part of chapter 4, where Jesus was talking about Bill taking on the role of teacher, teaching a class on abnormal psychology. And what comes out there is really interesting, which is that there are those who just want the teacher role for the sake of being above, for the sake of being the authority, for the sake of having the students look at them and say, you are amazing. And I think we know that the person whose motivation is that, they are a bit dangerous in that role. Okay. But then he also talked about someone who's more like Bill, who wants to avoid that role because they're thinking, if I get in that role, I'm going to have a bunch of students looking at me and telling me what an awful teacher I am. And that will completely like shatter my sense of self-esteem. And what Jesus is saying is that the teacher who wants to be above and thereby is attracted to the role, and the teacher who wants to avoid the role altogether, like Bill, they're two sides of the same coin, because both people are saying, when I enter this role, it's all about the power the students have over my self-image. The only difference is one guy is saying they're going to exercise that power in a positive way and pump me up, right? The other guy is saying they'll exercise that same power negatively and
Tear me down.
tear me down, right? And Jesus is saying neither of them get it. First of all, they need to realize the students don't have that power over them. And second of all, they need to realize this is about the students, right? They need to be devoted to the students, not to their image of themselves. And so neither one get it. And I think in laying that out, Jesus is offering us a higher vision of what it means to be any kind of a leader. Obviously, a teacher is one kind of leader, but any kind of leader has to have this attitude that the followers don't have power over my sense of self-worth, over what I am. And I can't see it being about my self-image. I have to see it being about them. I have to be in this out of devotion to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, whether you're stepping into a teaching role or whether you're stepping into a leadership role at work, or whether you're wanting to lead the volunteer committee in a local PTA, we all have those two sides of the coin. There are those who are, are stepping into the position because they want the power that comes with it. And then that there are people who are shrinking from it because they don't want the judgment that will inevitably come from it. And one thing that I'm constantly reminding people that I talk to who are in leadership positions who are being met with disapproval is that it just comes with the job. It just comes with the job, because there's always going to be someone who needs to be blamed and the buck stops somewhere. And so if you can just know that, and also, as Jesus is saying, not side with the misperceptions of you, because they do come in leadership positions, then you have what it takes to navigate it smoothly than you would have otherwise. And on Bill, I just want to, you and I talk about this all the time, where people, particularly in the course community, look at Bill not teaching as this great moment in personal humility. And look how Bill just demonstrated the principles and didn't want to step in front of others and share them. Well, there's another side to look at, another way to look at that too. What has the absence of Bill's voice cost students? Because had Bill got it. You know, we've done we did a podcast on Bill's journal. Dr. Bob, who just recently passed from the FIP, was in a workbook study group with Bill every day. Bill was very dedicated to the course, and at the end of his life really felt like he had mastered the principles of forgiveness. What have we lost because he didn't step up into that teaching function that Jesus clearly wanted for him? And so there again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but you can step into it for the wrong reasons, but you can step out of it for the wrong reasons too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we could talk a lot about I think what we lost with Bill's grasp of this path not being a stronger, louder influence out there. One thing though that comes to my mind based on that section about Bill as teacher in chapter 4 in the text is the word devotion, because what that first part of chapter 4 is largely about is the extreme value of devotion to others. And I think that because devotion sounds like you have a serious long-term commitment to someone, I think that tends to grate against the focus on, well, it's all about me. It's about my peace and my atonement, and et cetera, et cetera. Like devotion is the other end of the spectrum. And yet that's what we need in leadership roles. Yes, we need to have a sense of immunity to what they think of us, right? Like they can't take down my sense of self-worth. But that's only half of the equation. The other half is just devotion to those who are following. And I think that word is a key part of this whole discussion.
Well, that's the word that's associated with Jesus, right? Like I always like to say that Jesus got promoted to being the leader of the plan, God's plan for salvation, because he was the first to complete his part perfectly. But I think in the course, the line is actually he was promoted because of his devotion to his brothers. And so it wasn't being perfect, completing his part perfectly. It was his devotion to other people that got him promoted, if you will. And I just think that it is so perfect, because that's what works here in leadership as well. I shared a story in the Sunday gathering about how I was technically good on a job, but I didn't get the raise and the promotion because my boss told me that the team didn't respect me. And and he went through a process of mentoring me. And it was through the process of him caring about me and my development that I learned that what my team was looking for from me was that same kind of devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was devoted to me. I learned the process. I was devoted to them. I got their respect, and then I got the promotion, but it wasn't because of what I knew or how I could do the job. So that devotion is everything in terms of leadership. And it's interesting that that's why Jesus got promoted too. So we have that in common.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. But I do think we should say that his devotion to his brothers and him completing his own part perfectly, those are the same thing. Because his part was the
Devotion.
serving. Yeah, it was serving his brothers. And so his complete devotion to them is how he fulfilled his part perfectly.
So, what can we do to be the kind of leaders that the course is asking for?
Well, there's so much that could be said about that. First of all, I think we need to see ourselves as leaders. One of the things I got from that study is that the course sees everyone as a leader, because all of us, you define leadership as the ability to influence others. All of us are influencing others on that journey to God, right? We're all wielding influence. We all have people who are looking to us, wondering what we're going to do, how we're going to respond to the next thing. And so I think that we need to, first of all, just see ourselves in that role and realize that one thing, for instance, I got in touch with through the talk you gave on Sunday was, okay, I've got a leader in me already, and maybe I don't identify with that leader enough, but that leader is already in me. And I think every quiet person out there who doesn't see themselves as a leader has that leader already in them. And then the question is, how can they embrace that role, and how can they assume that role in its fullest dimensions? And I guess that's what you're asking. But I think there's a step that also needs to be acknowledged, which is like, this applies to us. Like,
Mhm.
even if you don't own a business, even if you're not, you have no authority over anybody in any formal sense, it still applies to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea that what the course is asking us to do as leaders is to heal our own perceptions, to get out of the illusion here and find our way home to God, and then turn around and help our brothers do the same. And as I was saying on Sunday, I think we get that first part on the spiritual path. Like we know we're here because we want to heal our perceptions, but we miss that second part. We miss it's your job to turn around and help your brother. And it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It doesn't mean you have to be fully healed. Doesn't mean you have to be awake. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that you have to try your hardest to hold the goal that the course has for you of healing your perception through unconditional forgiveness and love and dropping grievances and all the things that we talk about all throughout the year. And and so for me, what was striking is like the course has that goal for us, that we heal our perceptions and then we help our brothers. And so often when we talk about leading and leadership, we have goals that are so surface level. It's like, I want this job, I want to make this amount of money, I want to blah, blah, blah. But what if our leadership goals were the same as the course's leadership goals for us? What if we made that what it is that we want to do? And I think that would be a first step to, or a step to becoming the kind of leaders that the course is asking for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, ultimately, one of the things that's really clear in the course is that being a good leader rests on being a good follower,
Mm,
and particularly follower of the Holy Spirit. So if we want to be a good leader, we have to really focus on following, rather than, we don't see ourselves as walking in front so much as walking in the middle, right? Someone's in front of us, someone's behind us. And if the people behind us are going to be well served, we have to pay close attention to following the one in front of us.
Lesson 155 is a biggie in terms of this idea that I will step back and let him lead the way. And in that lesson, there's just some beautiful language around putting truth first, and we step back and allow truth to guide us. And what that looks like to me in the moment is stepping back from those triggered reactions, from that compulsive thinking that happens when other people aren't doing what we want, or some circumstances out of our control and things aren't going our way. We can get really, really lost in those situations. And that's where you either demonstrate true leadership skills or you don't.
Hmm.
And so if you can just think in those moments, and that's the hard part, because usually when we're triggered, that's when truth kind of just bounces off. And then we look back on it and we're like, dang, I could have handled that better. But if you, through the practice, the daily practice, this is what we say, you're not going to have access to the tools that you need in the moments when you need them if you're not practicing them throughout the day when you don't.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're triggered and you say, what can I do to let truth lead in this moment? What can I do to step back and let him lead the way? Then you'll do less things, your behaviors will be more wise, and you'll do less things that you regret.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really true. I think also we just have to remember that it's so much like real leadership is so much about the fundamental issues of, you know, for instance, the worth of the people who are our followers. You know, it's less about, I mean, I think from a real teacher, um, even if it's in a business context or they're teaching music or whatever, what's really being taught has more to do with the kind of fundamentals that the course is talking about. And one thing I think about is there was this program where disadvantaged young boys um, were in a special program that was designed to set them up for, you know, going on to a better, more successful life. And they found that this program had phenomenal success with a whole bunch of the boys that entered into it. They went on to become like lawyers and doctors and so on, things that you wouldn't expect from their disadvantaged beginnings. And they found that there was one teacher in particular who had unbelievable success. And they tracked her down. She was retired and she was much older. And they said, like, what was your secret? And she said, oh, it's simple. I love those boys.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So you see that even in some very specific contexts where you think it's about learning school subjects or about learning, you know, how to conduct yourself in business, what's really being communicated, I think, has to do with the kinds of truths the course is talking about.
Right, and that's where, when you are a course-based leader, you have a different view of what you're doing there in the first place, like who you are, who the other person is, and what's really going on here. So there's a job that you've been hired to do, and there's a job that someone else has been hired to do, and on the level of form, you're in the process of doing that job. But if you can think of your role as a leader as being the visible symbol of, or the visible ambassador of the invisible truth. So my job is to show up and love these people. My job is to show up and demonstrate true equality. My job is to show up and see their holiness and their worth and their beauty, regardless of what they say or do. And when you can do that, there's a magnitude, there's a presence that you have that others want to be around. And if other people want to be around you, like this teacher that you're describing, then guess what? You're a leader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whether you think of yourself as that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the images, the beautiful images that the course uses to describe leaders and leadership, is one of shining footprints. It's the idea that as leaders, we are laying down footprints, footsteps that others can follow on their way to God. And this is just a really striking image, and it says so much. Do you want to walk us through it? No pun.
Well, interestingly, it is completely part of that simple image that I've been talking about, where the leader is walking ahead and leaving shining footprints for those who are behind to follow. So you almost get the sense that, the image acts like there's a leader and right behind him are walking these followers. But the shining footprints suggests that the followers may come later when he's no longer visible, right? And all that's visible are those shining footprints. The Course uses the term shining footprints. It also says, as he lifts his foot to stride ahead, a star is left for those behind to follow, or something like that. So where each foot was, there is this little star that those left behind can follow. And there's so much in that image, right? What kind of footprints are we leaving behind for the people who come after to follow?
Or are we leaving behind stars or piles of manure, as I said on Sunday?
Yeah, right.
What? It's a funny thing to say, but it's an important thing to think about. It's, as a leader, what are you leaving behind? Are you leaving shining footprints and stars, or are you leaving cow patties for people to step in? And you pointed out, Robert, in your document on leadership, on this idea, as a leader, are you also leaving footprints that are scattered and meandering and starting and stopping? And, as a leader, are you taking people left and right and forward and back and stopping and starting? Or are you walking confidently straight ahead in the direction of God and love and truth? And that's to me, that's almost just as powerful of an image as the footprints themselves. How are you walking this way? Are you walking all over the place, or are you walking directly to God? And if you're confident in walking directly to God, then there's real presence in that, real power in that.
Yeah. Well, let me turn it around and ask you. I mean, you are the day-to-day leader in the circle. You are leading the organization. And it's been transformative for the circle. I suspect you have tons of leadership lessons that you've learned and that you bring and have applied. I know I'm sort of putting you on the spot here.
Yeah,
but
I know.
Are there any leadership lessons? I mean, I don't necessarily, I'm not asking for like a whole 10-point philosophy, but are there any leadership lessons that come to mind for you?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I had mentioned to you years ago, or actually you may have mentioned to me that we should do a workshop on leadership. And I was like, I had just started at the circle, and I was like, let's make sure that the circle is like actually successful before we're out there giving advice on leadership. And the circle has had a profound turnaround in the last 4 years. It's been really an honor to be part of, and the team is growing. And more than the team growing, it's a harmonious team. We're so sad to lose Danielle this week. Danielle has been with us for 3.5 years, and up until Danielle, she decided to move on to do writing, which is her a great passion and great love. But I was able to say we haven't had turnaround in years at the circle, and so that's an amazing thing, to bring a team together and to have it work and to have it be healthy and harmonious and functioning. And the byproduct of that is that those in our community get really quality work. And I know you have said that you feel free to do the best work of your career because you're not doing all the other things that you don't love. And so part of part of what I feel like it's my job to do as the leader is to set people free. And so I'm of the mindset that you find the very best people that you can. In our case, it's they have to have the technical skills, but they also have to really, really care about the mission. I will train someone in how to do their job, but I can't give you a love for what it is that we do. And if you don't have that, then it's probably not going to work for long here. And then I try and set people free, hire the best and set them free. And so everyone will tell you that there's a lot of autonomy and decision making here. I'm wanting ideas from people. And when they say, hey, I want to do this, I'm like, go do it. And so I think when you have the good people, they want that freedom. They want that autonomy and they want that harmony too. And so we've just been very blessed over these last few years to have all the pistons firing. And so I hope that is a good answer to your question, but that's
It
that's
is,
what
yeah.
comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say that I've learned a lot about the whole leadership thing just from kind of watching you move day to day in things. And there's a whole art and a science to it that does not come naturally to me. I mean, I'm a thinker, right? I just want to put thoughts together and communicate them, of course. But one thing I see you doing is you have your eye on the ultimate goal, and you're trying to get everything and everyone to sort of incrementally line up and point towards that ultimate goal. Um, and that's like so essential to everything, because if you're just kind of doing things for today,
Hmm.
right, with no sense of where it's all heading and no straight line from what you're doing today to the ultimate goal, then you can easily kind of lose your way.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because as I was sitting here kind of reflecting on what I've just said, there was a piece missing, and it's that it's the leader's job to set the vision. And I don't do that alone. I do that with you every day, all day long, and I do it with the board, obviously. But the people who work with and for you need to know where the whole thing is headed and when they have that vision, then the things that they tend to come to you and say, I'd like to do this, are within the bounds of that vision. And then it's easier to say, yes, go with that. And so I do feel like here at the circle, everyone here gets where it is that we're going. We want the course to become a global tradition. We want to make the course one of the world's great spiritual traditions. And what we do all day long, every day, is in service of that. And we try and put our heart first, but we've got our heads on straight as well. And that's a beautiful, beautiful combo, because when you have people who love each other and who are also just really smart and competent in what they do every day, and I'm so grateful to have a team like that, then you can actually see yourself reaching the goal.
Yeah.
So Robert, is there anything that you want to say before we close on the topic of leadership? Anything else that you want to say?
Well, there's so much what we could say, but I think that, for each of us, the ideal here is to incorporate that picture of there's a road to God. It's the only road that matters. We're all walking along it. And as we walk along it, we are leaders. We lead to the extent we can be good followers. We lead to the extent we're not in it to be the special one who has the power, but we're in it out of devotion to the people who follow. And, let's think of our lives within that picture and let that inner leader that we have really come out in the healthiest and most whole and constructive ways.
Yeah, I love that idea of seeing our lives as within that picture. And you can do that, as you're saying, whether you're in a formal leadership role or not. If you are a parent with your children, what kind of difference could you make in their lives if you are that model of leadership that we've been describing? You know, it's your job to love them as God loves you and to be God's ambassador for them in the world. And how could you make a real difference in their lives? And then it just extends from there, to everyone that you touch. And if we really saw our lives this way, we would be less hesitant to step into our function as leaders, and we all have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Robert. Thank you. As always,
Well, thank
um,
you.
I will see you here next week. Well, I'll see you. I mean, I live with you, so I'll see you like in a minute, but I'll see you on the podcast next week. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.